up the last three perspectives, and sorry, but these three perspectives are not nearly as entertaining as psychoanalysis.
I was thinking about it yesterday. Did you ever watch the show Daria?
No.
It's like a 90s spin-off of Beavis and Butthead.
Okay.
But
Is it a cartoon
yes,
or?
it's a cartoon. But the opening scene is it's like a school psychologist giving the Rorschach test and
Oh, really?
the tap test.
Every time I think of the Rorschach test, as far as like movies or shows go, I think of, Jim, you ever see Armageddon? They have to go in and take that. That's pretty funny. Yeah, Daria, I'll have to look that up. It's always good to add some humor. Keep everybody awake. All right, so as I said, these three perspectives are not nearly as interesting or entertaining as psychoanalysis. And some of this is review. As you know, your humanists are Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. This perspective on personality came about in the 1960s. This is when people were transitioning from looking at behavior back to the mental process and how people feel about themselves. In a nutshell, and before I go into all the different terms, someone from this perspective would say your personality is shaped by improving your self-esteem, your self-image, and self-actualizing, reaching your fullest potential. So if you can accomplish that, you're going to have a well-established personality. You're going to be emotionally stable. You're going to be open to new ideas, more creative, more confident, and outgoing. So that's the real purpose, or the theory behind humanism when looking at personality. But to get there, Abraham Maslow, as we know, said that you transitioned through the hierarchy of needs. Okay, now he doesn't really focus here on food and water. That's more of a basic need of motivation. But we transition through gaining acceptance from others, developing our self-esteem, and self-actualizing. And as we begin to self-actualize and reach your fullest potential and develop self-esteem, that's when your personality is shaped. And if you can accomplish that, like I said, you will be more outgoing, you'll be less neurotic, you'll be calm, confident, and independent. Right. So that's his take. Now, Carl Rogers, also like him, believed that we self-actualize, but he believed we get there by different means.
Is there any specific reason that there's a date next to his name and not Maslow's?
No, and I have no idea why I put that there. No idea. This PowerPoint I probably created the first year I started teaching. I mean, I modify them from time to time, but I can't remember. And remember, he's the one that came up with active listening and client-centered therapy. The most common question I've seen about his idea of personality would be, which of the following is not one of the three components needed to develop to your fullest potential? So you would pick one that's not genuine, acceptance, or empathy. If you rearrange them, they spell age, so that might help. I'm always looking at ways to help you remember things. But what he would say, Maslow believes we transition through the hierarchy of needs to reach our fullest potential. Okay, Rogers believes that we need to do these three things in order to self-actualize. First of all, we have to be genuine. Mean what that simply means. Mean what you say to people. Don't be fake. Acceptance. And here he's talking about accepting ourselves without judgment, but also others. You need to be accepting of others, even their faults. Accept people for who they are, basically. And be empathetic, and that obviously means being able to put yourself in someone else's place instead of being judgmental, instead of saying, why in the world would they do that? Try and put yourself in their place and think, this might be why they did that. So if you can do those three these three things, I can't talk today, that will help you get to your fullest potential and your personality will develop. Now, in addition to that, he believes that we do self-actualize, but if we can accomplish all of these three things, He goes above and beyond and says, we will develop what he refers to as unconditional positive regard. That's what we should strive for, according to him, in addition to self-actualizing like Maslow. And that means that you are totally accepting of yourself and others, completely, without judgment and ridicule. That's his, like, reaching your fullest potential compared to Maslow. Now, we do this as we develop our self-esteem, and that goes along with what Maslow said too. A lot of their ideas overlap. But one thing I should add here, he talks about self-concept too, and the difference between self-concept and self-esteem. And a lot of people mix those up. So if you want to write down self-concept, I don't have that up here. That is simply understanding your abilities and shortcomings. So understanding your abilities and your self-concept. Understanding your own abilities and your own faults or shortcomings. Self-esteem is basically how you feel about that. How do you feel about your abilities or things that you can't accomplish? So a good example for me would be my self-concept is I can run a marathon, but I cannot run a 50-mile race like my daughter did. Okay, that's my self-concept. I recognize my ability and my limits. My self-esteem is, how do I feel about that? I feel pretty good that I'm 48 and can run a marathon. I don't really care if I ever run 50 miles. I don't want to. If someone would have told me at the end of that I had to run another 20-some miles, I'd have punched them. That's how I felt. So that's how I feel about what my abilities are and what my limitations are. So that's the difference between self-concept and self-esteem. All right, sometimes there are a couple things that can either interfere or help us in our developing our self-esteem and unconditional positive regard. I just like that word. Okay, first of all, the spotlight effect can hinder us. That has to be Mr. Baker's music. So the spotlight effect, this can cause us to think less of ourselves and interfere with us developing to our fullest potential. This is the idea that we're in the spotlight, that people are judging us, whether it's our appearance or our performance, or if we do something wrong, they're criticizing us for that. And that causes us to lower our self-esteem. On the other hand, self-serving bias can help increase, and sometimes we just automatically do this, can help us increase our self-esteem or self-concept. Self-serving bias, you want to keep this in mind. This is one of the terms that you'll see on your free response for the county final, which is good. That's an easy term. But I don't like the definition. I don't like the definitions they have in the book. Readiness to perceive oneself favorably. This means that if we do something wrong, we tend to try and blame someone else, and that makes us feel better. So you might say, I failed that test because the teacher made it too hard. Or they put questions on there that they never talked about in class, so they set me up for failure. And it just makes us feel better, so then we don't have to recognize our shortcomings. So spotlight effect can interfere with us improving our self-esteem and self-concept and so forth, where self-serving bias can help us feel better about ourselves. We justify why we did something wrong and blame someone else, kind of finding that scapegoat. So, all right, so that's all for humanism, but just keep in mind, this perspective would say our personality is shaped by how we feel about ourselves and self-actualization, reaching our fullest potential, and developing that total acceptance of ourselves and others, positive, unconditional regard. All right, so now we're going to move on to trait. Like I can cover all three of these in one period as opposed to psychoanalysis over 2 days. So the trait perspective was proposed by Gordon Allport. And this perspective would state that we just categorize not by, our personality is not shaped by childhood experiences or unconscious thoughts or how we feel about ourselves or reaching our fullest potential, but we're simply born with it. So you want to put that, this is a biological factor, that the personality you're born with will pretty much stay constant your whole life. And that's how we categorize someone. We call someone, lazy or ambitious or extroverted or open or creative. Is how people describe you. In order to find out your personality type, you will take a test, which is called, and I'll put up here in a minute, personality inventory test, which I've taken all three of the different tests. And what it will say is ask you a series of scenarios or questions, and you'll say, I agree this about myself, or I disagree, or I strongly agree or strongly disagree, and you go through like 25 to 50 questions depending on the test, and then they tell you a little bit about yourself, and breaking it down into specific traits, which I'll put up here. But I can tell you after taking it, I could have probably guessed what my personality would have been when I get the results. Most of us do know how we act, whether we're shy or outgoing, whether or not we're very uptight and anxious or very calm and relaxed. But these are things that these tests tell you. But what you need to take from this is the 3 different tests, you have to know them. And also that this is pretty much a perspective that says you're born with these traits. And these tests actually just identify those traits that you're born with. So let's look at the first one. And this is probably, first of all, they're called personality inventory tests. And a lot of times students mix up projective tests with personality inventory tests, because you'll see a question that asks about the difference. Personality inventory is telling you what traits you possess that you're born with, what's your personality type. And the projective test, remember, they were the TAT test and the Rorschach test that was projecting your unconscious. So you have to know the difference. People mix those up. All right, so there are 3 main trait personality inventory tests. One of the most popular, and you can take online, and I'll show you the website later if you want to take it. This is called the Big 5. Now, all you need to know are the 5 traits on the left. That's usually a question. They say which of the following is not one of the Big 5. And if they did ask you about any of those, they're pretty easy to understand. I'll go through them with you. And put neurotic for the first one instead of emotional stability, or you can put emotional stability beside it, but you'll see neuroticism more often. So you answer a series of questions. I believe the one that you can take online, there is a 25 question test. with the big five and also a 50 question test. And again, I'll just say, do you agree that this applies to me or this doesn't? If you see a question that says, which of the following is not one of the big five traits, keep in mind they spell ocean or canoe. So if you rearrange them and use neuroticism instead of emotional stability. All right, beside each of these, if you want to put a little description instead of writing all of the detail on them, I'll give you an idea of what they're actually looking at in each column. So for conscientiousness, it's basically how much do you care about yourself and what you do, your accomplishments. Like, are you motivated or not, basically. For agreeableness, this is basically, they're looking at how well you get along with others. I'm rearranging my words. How well you get along with others. If you're compliant or just trusting. Now, neuroticism basically is your emotional stability. You're looking at, are you uptight and anxious or are you calm? And openness, are you open to new ideas? Creative, or do you like routine? Same old, same old. And obviously, extroversion is, are you social or are you shy? So after you take those questions, after you answer all those questions, it would give you a score on where you rank in each of these different dimensions. All right, so that's the big five. And out of all of the tests, or all of these personality inventory tests that you see on the AP test, this is the one that they usually ask about. All right, that's the website, which I'll give you later if you want to take it. The second personality inventory test is the Hans and Sybil Eisnick test. And they were a husband and wife team who created this personality test. Instead of looking at 5 dimensions after you answer questions, they put you in one of 4 quadrants. And you should know the ones that are enlarged there, unstable or stable, introverted or extroverted. So after answering questions, you would either be placed in the unstable extroverted or unstable introverted or stable extroverted. And as you read the description in those quadrants, you can probably pretty much pick out where you would be placed. That's what I was trying to say. Before you take these tests, most of us have an understanding, unless you have a personality disorder, we have an understanding of our personality and how we act. So you would want to be at the bottom half of the quadrant. You want to be up at the top, being impulsive and restless and rigid and anxious and moody. So the further down you get, the better adjusted you are. All right, the last one is used more or less in a clinical setting and not so much for fun. What's that? Yes, MMPI. You probably won't see Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory Test, but actually put this stands for MMP1, but they just came out with the 2nd edition, so you might want to put MMP2. Yeah, that was just released at the end of last year. And I'm not sure if most of the facilities have it yet, but they did create a new version. Like I said, this is used more in a clinical setting. Not only does it, like any patient that came in to the Finan Center, the psychologist gave them this test, because not only does it tell you a little bit about their personality, but it identifies mental disorders and emotional conditions also. And you don't have to know these over here on the right. I just put them as an example. Like it would point out if they were depressed or paranoid or had suffered from hypochondriasis, hysteria, extremely introverted. So I mean, it just gives you a little insight, but also tells you about their emotional state. Even schizophrenia is on here, so it looked at some mental disorders also. So this was a good test or a tool to give when people were first admitted, so you know how to treat them in response to that. All right, so those are the 3 personality inventory tests. The last perspective we're going to look at today is social. Before I put this up here, who did the Bobo doll experiments? Anybody remember? Good, Bandora. That's who we're looking at here. He came up with this 3rd perspective on personality called social cognitive perspective. So remember, cognition is your thoughts, social is your environment, your experiences. I hate these definitions. If I had to learn by just looking at this definition, I'd never learn anything. Behavior is influenced by interactions and our interpretation. Basically what this means is instead of our personality just being set in stone, you're going to act the same way all the time, which you all can probably think of that. You probably don't act the same when you're in school as opposed to when you're at home or when you're out with your friends. Your personality changes. You're not always the same. For example, if you're sitting in a classroom and you don't know another person in there and everybody in there is kind of quiet, you'll be quiet. So you're acting shy and introverted. Doesn't mean that's how you are. If you're in a room with a bunch of people you know, you're going to talk and you'll be more extroverted. So Bandora pointed out that our personality changes on the situation we're placed in. That's what that means. So it's our interpretation of our environment determines our personality and how we're going to act. You know, you've probably I went into someone's classroom who's very like uptight and not very relaxed. You're gonna act accordingly, right? You're not gonna talk, you're not gonna feel like you can respond or, answer questions. As opposed to someone who's more laid back and relaxing, you'll feel better and you'll feel more relaxed as well. Okay, so he also goes on to say, we actually create our own environments. And just like I was saying, if I come in and I'm in a bad mood and I'm like throwing things down and I'm nasty, you're all gonna be tense. I'm creating that environment and you're gonna treat me accordingly. You're not gonna treat me very friendly, are you? Okay, this has a name. This is called reciprocal determinism. There again, the definition isn't figure out. The interaction in which the environment, one's behavior, and personal factors influence each other. Basically, if you think of the term, it will help you. Okay, your actions towards others determine how they will reciprocate towards you. If you're mean to someone or give them the cold shoulder, they're going to be like that. They're going to, in return, treat you that way. And I like to use the teacher example because I graduated 30 years ago, so things were different when I went to school. And I had this teacher who scared me to death. I mean, I was petrified because when you were in his class, your feet had to be flat on the floor, you had to be facing forward, your pen had to be or pencil on the desk, paper at a certain angle, and you couldn't move. You couldn't slouch, you couldn't like lean back and have your feet out. It was just, you had to sit like this, right? And he would call you on it if you didn't. And there was absolutely no talking whatsoever in his class. So, of course, I get stuck by this girl, Carrie, who just never stops talking. Not you, Carrie. But she lives in California now. No, maybe in Florida she moved. Anyway, she talked all the time. And we just got new seats, and he put her beside me. So he's up on the board writing, and she's going, like, talking to me, and I'm thinking, he's going to turn around, he's going to think we're having a conversation, I'm going to get in trouble because he had punishment in his classroom. So I'm just sitting there staring straight ahead, and he's up there writing, and finally I looked at her, I said, would you shut up? And sure enough, he turns around and sees me saying that. He's like, get up. And I'm like, oh no. One of his punishments was you had to go to the back of the room, and he made you hold your arms out like this, and he stuck textbooks all the way up to your chin. And then you had to put your nose against the wall in the back. Talk about humiliating for the rest of the class. Anybody who went parents went to Valley High, you have to ask about this. And if you drop your books, you had to do it again the next day. So I remember like holding them up with my knee and stuff. But yeah, it was very different back then. But anyway, he created a very tense environment. I went in there, I didn't learn a thing because I was always worried about is my paper at a certain angle, am I sitting up straight, and don't look around. That's all I could think about. I had no idea. I mean, it was our science. I couldn't tell you a thing about that class, but maybe looking at those rocks when we actually got to get up and move or whatever. But you create your own environment. You know? The way you act will determine how other people reciprocate towards you. And nobody talked at all in there. Say, the other example I gave you, I already wrote this. If you are easygoing, you make other people feel comfortable. This in turn causes them to treat you nicely. And the one at the top, if you expect someone's angry with you, if you think, oh, I bet they're angry with me because of what I've done, you start giving them the cold shoulder, well, now they are angry with you and they're going to ignore you. So you create your own environment, basically, according to this perspective, which is pretty cool. All right, so it's how you think about the situation that you're put in will determine how you act, what your personality will be like. All right, so we're gonna look at control next, which Bandura believed played a big factor in how you assess your situation that you're in. Oh my gosh, I had this reminds me, I had this other teacher who, if you were dozing off and falling asleep, he'd come behind you and smack your back of your head. You could just do whatever. And this poor kid was in my class and he had a pencil stick sitting on his desk, and when the teacher hit the back of his head, the pencil went in his forehead. Oh my gosh. And you couldn't, and you didn't want to stare or look because then you would get yelled at too. You guys are lucky you didn't go to school in the 80s. No, not all teachers were like that. Just the ones who were really from old school. So, according to Bandura, if we feel we have internal locus of control and we control our own fate, that helps us. We think confidently about our situation, and we will be more independent and more stable emotionally. If we don't believe we have control, we'll be anxious and depressed and maybe moody and irritable. So not only does having control or not having control affect our stress level, and if we're angry or not, it also plays a factor in how we act in our personality. I'm going to try this little activity here. Keep these face down until I tell you to turn them over. So pass them back. And the last concept we're going to try to do is keep these down until I ask you to turn them over. Everybody has to start at the same time. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. We'll see. That's one back there again. Okay, now what I'm going to have you do is when I say go, you're going to flip your paper over. And there, you'll see 3 words. And you're only going to do one at a time. Whatever word you see, you're going to try and rearrange it and make a new word. As soon as you do that, turn your paper back over, and when roughly half the class gets one, we'll move on to the second. Okay? All right, go. Just number 1. Okay, that's way over half the class. All right, go ahead. Number 2. That's over half the class. Let's go to number 3.
Do we have to use the whole letter?
Yeah, I have to use all the letters. Okay, I will stop you because that's priceless. I tricked you guys. You guys had, what was your first word? Bat, which you can make tab. You had whirl, no possibility. You guys had what? Lemon, which you can make melon. You guys had slapstick, and then no possibility. You both had the third word, same. Okay, now, because you guys were successful in the first two, you were all continuing to try for the majority on the third. You're still plugging at it. Like, Michaela, other people over here, they're just giving up. They're like, we can't get the first two, you were trying. But most of the time, students who have not been successful on those first couple attempts are like, well, this is dumb, I'll never get the third one. So they give up. But those who had been successful, they keep trying. And this is a concept called learned helplessness, which I instilled in you guys in a couple seconds here. So when you've been beat down over and over again, and you do not have control, you just give up. And this concept was coined by Martin Seligman. Did you guys feel pathetic when other people were getting it? Yes. Like, what is wrong with me? How are they doing this? Sorry, I made you feel inferior. But it worked. And he used also the idea of people who are put into concentration camps or death camps. When they're first placed there, they'll spend every day, all day, trying to think of ways to escape until all possibilities have failed and they've been beat down and they think it's hopeless, so they just completely give up. So whenever you feel like control is completely out of your hands, then quit trying. So that's learned helplessness. And that's it. Oh, no, I do have one more thing. Do I have time for it? I was going to put this up here tomorrow, but I'm doing a review with you tomorrow, so let's do this now, because I know we have 15 minutes. There is one more take on a biological perspective on personality, and this is the somatotype theory. This is a fairly new theory that was proposed by William Sheldon. This theory just was added into the last text version that I got in Myers 10. He believed that we're born with our personality, but it depends on our body type, that we're predetermined to have a certain body type, and along with that body type goes certain personality traits. So he believed that endomorphs, which are overweight people, tend to be friendly and outgoing. What about really thin people? What kind of character traits do you think they'll put with them?
Frantic.
Frantic. Spotty? Just curious to see what you thought. He said that there are more secretive, that's mesomorphs. Go down here. He believed that they're more shy and secretive. That mesomorphs, muscular people, he believed they're more aggressive. So this is, like I said, one of the newest biological take on personality. All just theories, because not everybody's going to apply.
What about if somebody gets fatter or
Goes back and
skinnier?
down, goes back and forth. I don't know. I guess he's saying it's biological, so I don't know. Which doesn't make sense, because yes, you can go through periods where you're overweight and then become very thin. I guess again, he's talking about the average, because we're all so different. Not everybody can follow. All right, so tomorrow, for the 15 minutes I see you, we'll do a quick review for your test on Monday.